Go ahead, Mayor Pro Tem.
Okay. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We'll call this meeting to order. This is a work session. I believe we're calling it the Sidewalk Summit. We may have the mayor joining us, but he is not able to be here at the moment. So with that, I would ask the clerk to call the roll, please.
Apologize, just a moment, Mayor Pro Tem. City Attorney Doctor.
Here.
Interim City Manager Burton.
Here.
Commissioner Shirtley.
Here.
Commissioner Reed. Here. And Mayor Pro Tem Dean.
Here. Okay, first, are there any commission comments or questions? Okay, seeing none, we will go ahead and move on to committee discussion. Today we'll be discussing the Sidewalk Summit. This is simply a discussion and an opportunity for the staff to provide, I think, what will be some really helpful and interesting information and help set us up to start making policy decisions in the future. I think this is the first time that both commissioners, Reed and Shirtliff, have had the opportunity to have the more broad sidewalk discussion. We've started it about a year ago, year and a half ago, really focusing on sidewalk solutions. So with that, we'll pass it off to Director Konopke.
Thank you. So I think we're still trying to get some technical issues worked out, but I'll just start with Mayor Pro Tem and Commissioners. You're correct. Last year, we started doing the in-depth dive into sidewalks, but this has been a topic of discussion for a long time, going back decades. It goes back and forth. So this is the first slide is just our introduction. The second slide is kind of what we're looking to focus on. We're going to talk about our current policy, current city code, and the future sidewalks as we move forward through this. So current, the original sidewalk improvement program resolution was originally established in 1990 and revised in 2004. I'm not going to read these verbatim because I don't think I need to, but it allowed for sidewalks to be rebuilt, curb and gutter, driveways and alley approaches. Sign up period was the 6 months preceding May 31st of each program year. Written request was required, and the property owners were considered part of the annual program once construction or replacement of the sidewalk had occurred. There was language in the original about assessing the levy against the property for a term of 10 years with an interest rate of prime plus 1%. The balance can be paid off at any time. The next page is what the current program looks like. Not much difference from the original program, other than our application process opens around February 1st of every year. Once we get a contractor on board for that season to do that work. Previous years' interest rates have been set at 0 by the commission. Still, the term is 10 years, balance can paid off. So not much has changed other than just the interest rate has been deemed to be 0% for the last few years.
So Mayor Pro Tem and Commissioners, on that note, the rate is meant to be set annually. I don't know that we've always done that, but we could, going forward on a program like that, we could revise the resolution if the general consensus and direction is that we don't plan to change that from 0%. If we could just make that the standing rate and not have to do the annual review of the rate.
So in the past couple of years, we also did a couple some pilot projects. One of those was the sidewalk grinding. There's a little picture over on the right-hand slide showing of the grinder. That hose that's hooked up to it is a vacuum that has a HEPA filter adequate to clean the air so that the silica dust coming off of the concrete isn't put out into the open. And today we've done about 25 properties of varying degrees. Some have been just a little bit, others have been pretty extensive. I think the program has been good. I think the grinding process has alleviated some mitigation for property owners that otherwise would have to spend the money to replace that panel or 2 or 10 side of the sidewalk. But the only caveat is we are removing concrete. And so depending on the displacement of the trip hazard, we're only allowed, we can only really take off about 1 inch of sidewalk. It kind of depends if we know what the thickness of the sidewalks, that might vary, but typically sidewalks are 4 inches. Taking off any more would compromise the structural integrity. But we also inform all the property owners that have this done that says, tell them that that could happen with this grinding. But it's been received very well. I think it's been a good program for the city, and I think we'll, obviously continue using it, but a good program. Current challenges for not only the city, but property owners that wish to fix their sidewalks or install sidewalks, contractor availability, and funding on the city side. The contract availability is basically, unless you've called them and they've actually returned your calls and got an estimate and a build date, sometime like in January, February, they get pretty booked up pretty fast. And so it is difficult for even the city to get contractors to bid on our sidewalk program itself. Moving on to the 5th slide. This is a very quick summary. We have like all the other slides in the back of the presentation with the full code in case we want to dive into that, but this is kind of the summary. The sidewalk is in 741. And the purpose is all properties abutting the frontage, side margin of the street will be deemed abutting and shall build sidewalks, curb and gutters for that property and shall be built to the following standards, which are explained in the code. Just some highlights on that one. We highlighted sidewalks to be placed 1 foot from the property line. That was a practice to put the curb stops and some other utilities in there. In review of that, we may come back and ask the commission for a change there because, to allow for that to be used as part of the sidewalk, thus making more room for a wider boulevard or a wider street or non-motorized facilities.
Director, can I go back for a second to the contractor availability? It's my understanding, and I think it was, I don't know when we stopped doing this, but the city used to have FTEs that repaired sidewalks. This might have even been like 40 years ago. I don't know. I guess it given just, I mean, we struggle. We talk about benefits and market wages and the rest, but is it worth a discussion at some point as to whether we just hire our own FTEs rather than, constantly trying to get bids and maybe only getting one, if not any?
Mayor Pro Tem, Commissioners, yes, it is. It allows us the flexibility to do things like we have done with buying the paint truck. We can do it on our schedule versus having to wait for a contractor or their availability. Right now, the amount of sidewalks out there, there's plenty of interest at this point. If we get into a bigger program, then that, obviously would evolve that FTEs or how we frame that to look. But yes, it's definitely a route that would be worth considering.
And Mayor, not only repair, but also inspection.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Commissioner Reed.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Question for you. I scanned through quickly, so maybe it's here and I missed it. But with regard to variance, for the benefit of those here and listening, is there, I know we don't have like case law or jurisprudence on city code, but is there standards for granting variances on sidewalks or criteria to be considered when granting that is somewhere we could direct people to look to, or does that not exist?
So Mayor Pro Tem Commissioner, that's in 742A2. The city commission may grant a variance to the sidewalk placement requirement of this section upon application from the owner of the property abutting the proposed sidewalks. So that's been discussed, and that's only on placement. So whether that's the placement from the 1 foot off the property line versus curbside, that's placement. It doesn't read that the commission can totally eliminate sidewalks. It's the way code is written, it's to promote the large sidewalks, basically.
Just to clarify, so that is the only place that variances are discussed or clarified. There's no additional information about what guides the decision on variance or what criteria may be considered. That does not exist in code.
Correct.
Thank you.
City Manager.
But Mayor Pro Tem Commissioner, point well taken. And part of reviewing the code is to see if you want to change some of the code. Maybe you do down the road consider criteria, and rather than having to have it go in front of the commission, it could be an administrative process if it meets your criteria.
I think just to clarify my point, I wasn't trying to actually make a point. I think it's, people know they can request a variance, but I've not had luck finding on what grounds.
Yeah.
So I think it's useful for people who are considering variances or understanding why we do and do not grant them to know on what grounds we make those decisions. So I appreciate that it is not spelled out in code currently.
City Attorney.
Mayor Pro Tem Commissioner Reed, I think that's a really good question because there is case law on what standard you have to find in order to grant a variance. That hasn't been part of the discussion in the past that I've understood. And I do think that's something that we could bring forward for you in the event there are, requests for variances on not just sidewalks, but others as well. But usually the way you read this is if the legislature, which is you, sees fit to put in code how you want to, the standard, which is pretty limited sidewalk placement requirements, that usually means you exclude all the other reasons you would request a variance. And so I guess I would argue, just looking at this, that there is one reason, one way you can ask for a variance, and it's if you want a variance from sidewalk placement requirements. Does that help?
So to continue on, just a couple high points. We're going to talk the variance. The alley approaches seem to be an issue that comes up, questions regarding that. And city code does address that, and alley approaches are to be assessed against all property owners or all properties within the block served by the alley, not just the adjacent property owners. Because that's, I'm guessing it's the reason, it's the general benefit to the entire alley and not just the two adjacent property owners. The other piece of code that we just thought we'd summarize is 748, the repair of sidewalks. That's the adjacent property owner's responsibility. And then also, a lot of people know, but a lot of people don't know, we do have a historic brick sidewalk district. That's found in 7410. That's basically bounded by Benton on the east, Hauser on the north, and Hayes on the west, and then Holter and Clark to the south. It's kind of that, not exactly square, but squarish area that the historic side, the brick sidewalk district. Any questions on the summary of code? So the next section is Title 12, Chapter 2, Section 15. And this is part of the subdivision where sidewalks, Section D, on both sides of the street must be installed by the owner of the subdivided property concurrent with installation of streets, curb and gutter. The reason we bring this up is we've heard this up on Piper Place where a subdivision was granted a variance and then it would appear to be carried through to the owners to build. And so I wouldn't say it's a conflict in code, but it's something that we should probably look at revising so that the language is either works together or it's in one or the other places. The picture below there is just an example of the subdivider building sidewalks prior to the house or home being on that property, or what it would look like if that was built by the subdivider. Questions? So why are we here? Sidewalks keep coming up, but there was a large number of variances and the discontinuity of sidewalks, which has been brought up by different groups, MTAC, Helena Citizens Council, and among others, about walkability in the city of Helena. So the picture there shows an area of town that is not typical, but it is, you can't see those around town where we have sidewalks. The one side looks like we have 3-foot sidewalks. There's another short piece for the mailbox, which is really typical in some neighborhoods where they just poured a sidewalk from their walkway out to their mailbox so that they could get to their mailbox easier. But those are the types of things that I think we're trying to address with this discussion. So we did do a very quick and very rough inventory of the sidewalks. And currently we're sitting at less than 60% of the city has sidewalks adjacent to the roadways. I would like to, caveat or just say there are some areas in town that sidewalks, both sides, boulevard sidewalks, what have you. There's conditions out there that we need to look on a case-by-case basis in some cases because of just topography or other reasons that may or may not be a feasible installation of sidewalks. As we talked about earlier, currently the sidewalk placement is the only variance that can be granted by the commission. And as we discussed, this could be changed to an administrative process, such as the city code could be revised to have the city manager or designee approve or deny sidewalk variance requests. With the change in code like that, an appeal process could be put in there. So there was a chance for people to appeal that decision. But I think part of this process is we just need to reassert that boulevard sidewalks was the intent to city code. And that's what's in the code right now, with only one variance allowed. Any questions on? Okay. We put together some potential scenarios. These are not, this is obviously not an all-inclusive list. These were just some things that we thought about that could address some of the things that we come up with or faced with right now. So over to the side, we just put examples of what an unimproved road looks like, a partially improved road and an improved road. Obviously unimproved has no improvement features like curb and gutter, sidewalk, or asphalt. Partially improved does have asphalt, not curb and gutter. The asterisks there are double shot chip seal, which we find in some areas of town. Even though it looks like asphalt, it's not asphalt and typically is not to the thickness of our current standards. So those would have to be looked at. And then an improved area, an improved road is just something that has curb and gutter and asphalt in more of an infill. So some of these scenarios would consider infill versus unimproved areas. We could, do code revisions that granted variances for certain scenarios like new installations with potential justifications being narrow right of way or unimproved infrastructure in the adjacent or in the area. But we would suggest property owners would have to agree to waive their right to a future protest on any improvements in that district.
That's a good question. Thank you. Just a quick question, not being an engineer at all. If someone were to install a sidewalk on an unimproved road in front of their house, are there issues if the road is later improved? Does it present any challenges if there are sidewalks which still allow people to walk on that road, not in the middle of the road? Is it a problem when the city improves the road if sidewalks are there?
Mayor Pro Tem, commissioners, not always. We can go out and give a pretty good guesstimate if it's just a dirt road of where the asphalt top course would be. And then extrapolate that into where the property is and give an approximate elevation for the top of sidewalk. But this is where boulevard sidewalks really is one of the high points of boulevards. Even if we're off, that boulevard area can absorb some of the miscalculation, or if they did it on their own, that boulevard can be a little steeper, a little bit flatter, and still accomplish having sidewalks there, and then roads come in later.
Mayor Pro Tem,
Commissioner Sherwood.
thank you. Mr. Kanopki, you mentioned that less than 60% of, we're at less than 60% for sidewalks within side city limits, and mentioned it was a case by case issue. Is it have to do with funding? Is it a code change, or is it an all of the above? How can we get to closer to 100% on that?
Mayor Pro Tem, commissioners, all of the above.
All of the above.
Right now, city code, requires the adjacent property owners to install sidewalks at the time of building, but if they've already built and it's not there, then there's the city code also allows for the commission to order in sidewalks. But I think it's more of a project for the city to come and show the community why we need sidewalks. It's not just because they're gray and they look, great in front of your house, but that boulevard feature not only enhances your house, enhances the feel. There are a lot of advantages to the sidewalks. Anecdotally, people have told me the areas where there's a lot of sidewalks, people are out walking. And even in areas where there isn't sidewalks, people are out walking, but they're walking in the street. That was and that's not really where we want folks walking, especially on some more the busier neighborhood collector streets that we have, similar to the night discussion. So.
Yep, sure. No, it's good.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Just following up on Commissioner Sherwood's question, do we know what percentage of the roughly 40% that does not have sidewalks is unimproved or partially improved? Do we have information on that?
Mayor Pro Tem and commissioners, not at this time. We're working at that. It was basically started as a desk audit, working with what information we had from the 2014 LRTP. And then they did a desk audit using our radar video from when we did the pavement indexing to do a desk audit. And then we're trying to get it into GIS so that we have what roads have, unimproved, where we have ADA ramps, so that we can better, when we start looking, if we start looking at targeting specific areas where the biggest need is, and then going out and doing a field verification of any challenges that there may be. I mean, we have streets on the west side that are not centered on center line. And, that poses a problem because fences or buildings have been built up to the, to the property or to the right of way line or past it. So there are challenges out there to overcome, but no. Short answer.
I might just provide the comment really briefly. So historically, I mean, the desire for sidewalks to have walkable neighborhoods is not new in Helena. I actually was just talking to someone who is doing some research on Helena, and they sent me a picture of a document to the city commission at the time in 1894, petitioning the commission to allow them to put in sidewalks. And you'll see around town, but lots of neighborhoods have sidewalks that are connected, but you also see those neighborhoods that are developed, from 1950s, 60s, 70s up until, I don't know if we know when exactly the code was changed back to requiring them, but closer to the 80s and 90s. We see like a community value of, yes, we want sidewalks, they're important, walkability and connectivity is a value that we hold, but there's a gap of 40 years there that has caused this and growth of the community where it wasn't required. So west side, not the historical west side, but farther west side, we just don't have any sidewalks, and it's also all the neighborhoods that were built in the 60s and 70s. So I think that's important context that since Helena's founding, folks did want sidewalks, but there was kind of a cultural shift and you see it around the nation. I mean, we're not the only ones, but I think it's good context to keep in mind that for some of these neighborhoods that are built in particular time periods, that's where the biggest issues I think seem to reside. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. So the other, alternatives that we kind of came up with is how do we address all these different road structures that we have? So everything in there requires code revisions. The unimproved roads, we could go as far as just doing districts, or we could just do a waiver of an SID. We could meet with the community. I know there's neighborhoods that really want sidewalks, and we can put out the word and say, hey, we're interested in helping you along this process. So there's a number of avenues that we could go down. But the ones over here, the partially improved, we can, sidewalks being installed next to a roadway, as long as they're in the proper location, can be installed, and we can help out with the placement of the elevation so that when the further improvements come along, they are close and that they can just tie into the new improvements. Fully, the improved roads where it's mostly infill. Some, like you said, some neighborhoods have sidewalks, some don't, but at some point we just got to move forward and follow the code. So at that point, we could grant them a deferral if that's a route that the commission would like to go down. We could do, again, participate in upcoming projects. But infill is a little bit more of a, I think, a priority because of the infrastructure mostly there to connect what we already have around them.
Mayor Pro Tem and Commissioners, before we go on, so I think Commissioner Reed, the slide that we're just looking at, I think most directly answers your earlier question of what are the circumstances in which they should apply for a variance or could apply for a variance. So while it doesn't exist now, without trying to direct the conversation in any one direction from our end, right? These are some of the things that we see as potential circumstances in which a variance would apply.
In the future, correct?
Yes.
Right. with city code revisions.
Right, with the revision.
Okay, so to enforcing the code. How do we encourage repairs or installation? We believe that the enforcement arm of this greatly depends on the final vision of the commission and the city's view on where we want sidewalks, how we want sidewalks, and where we're going to install them. But the topics for consideration that really go along with probably every vision other than not doing it at all is reasonable timeframes for sidewalks to be repaired or that have deficiencies. Some communities are immediately, some communities are 45, 60, 90 days. But I think we have to take that in context because we could get a reported trip hazard on October 21st. And we go out on the 22nd and say, yep, there is one. And on the 23rd, it snows. And then winter is set in. So part of that time frame would have to have a component that would understand that there would be a potential for a winter basically shut down like we do for contracts to allow the property owner to get them done in the spring if need be. Right now,
Director Connolly,
Yes.
just before you might, so for those, say, folks who they want to get, there's a deficiency, they're cited, working to get it corrected, and would like to work through the city sidewalk program. I guess, what does that look like if the wait list is pretty long at the moment. Do you have ideas about how we address that, or does that come back to kind of the contractor availability issue?
Commissioner Pro Tem, Commissioners, yes, it does. We have the ability to talk with our contractor and say, hey, this person, is looking for work or looking for somebody to do some work. It really depends on their availability. Right now, we're limited on funding. That's why the interest is so high, is we can only do so many sidewalks with the funding that we have a year, in addition to the contractor. But I think we have seen where, higher amounts, say funding amounts, could equate to a little bit more interest into the sidewalk program for contractors to come in and do the work. But unfortunately, most of the time, if they were to get a notice of violation, in the middle of the summer, it's going to be very difficult for them to find someone. I'm not saying it's impossible, but if they have the means to do it themselves, it's only one panel, maybe that's an option, but really it's a funding and availability issue.
I guess if I can ask one more follow-up question. So how does that interact then too with, there have been instances where, folks will file a complaint because of, there's mobility issues and some sort of obstruction within the sidewalk that maybe has to do with its condition. ADA doesn't necessarily take into account contractor availability, but what happens then?
Mayor Pro Tem and Commission, I think that's one of those discussion points on this. Is it immediate? Do we give them 45 days? What is that reasonable time frame? Yes, ADA is very strict. But I agree with you that I don't think it contemplates whether it's just a code that is required, and this is the whatever the requirement is.
Okay.
So I think that's one of those, if we had the ability, to have contractors on board to do work, we had the ability to maybe do some of the smaller projects in-house or just have a crew of our own to do work. that might free up some resources to be able to address all these complaints. But it is a big long list at this point.
Yep.
Member Tim.
Commissioner Shertliff?
Thank you, Director Kanopke. The list that you speak of, what, do we know how many people are on that waiting list? But also too, what is our current funding level for the sidewalk project fund, as well as what is the demand in terms of, we have this much money, here's how much the demand is.
So Mayor Pro Tem, Commissioners, our funding level right now is $150,000 a year.
And it's a revolving loan.
Yes, so the applicant, it's on the program, whatever their portion of the program they use goes on to their taxes for 10 years. At an interest-free transfer.
So Mayor Pro Tem and Commissioners, to kind of expand on that question, and it goes back to Pro Tem Dean questions. With the size of our contract, right, it's hard to find a contractor to fill that dollar amount. A lot of them are on much larger projects, right? So although we had a contractor on this year, again, they have other jobs as well. And so I think at this point, we're about done. I think we did maybe a dozen to 15 or so projects. And I don't think we were able to utilize the entire 150,000 in this round. As to the number of people that were waiting, it's, as you said, the number is high. I don't have the exact number, but there was definitely more people wanting to be in the program than we would have been able to fund anyway. And so as far as leveraging contractors and our ability to do more work, we've discussed internally something like a term contract, where the city has a pot of money that we say we're going to pay for this much sidewalk per year on a contract basis, but then also leverage that relationship even further to say that if we have residents that want to do their own, not through the program, just pay and get it done, a small project like that is going to be hard for a resident to get a contractor to come and do in a timely manner. So we may be able to leverage our own contract further beyond to say that we aren't going to pay. If they want to pay for themselves, that's great. But all that work would go through the same contractor under a larger contract, so that they are available. They know that the project is bigger, the scope is bigger, and they'll actually come through and want to work with the city to get those done.
Yes, City Attorney.
Mayor Pro Tem, Commissioners, I think David and Chris are giving a good practical answer. I just wanted to give you the code answer to your question also about what happens if there's a repair or something that has to happen. There is the code section, and on the same, on this same slide, 748 is what I'm referring to. The whole thing isn't there, but whenever there is a sidewalk, curb, gutter, which is in disrepair by whatever reason, and it becomes dangerous to the public safety, city engineer shall require the owner of the premises to have it repaired. In the case of his refusal or neglect to comply with that, we can go and do the repair for them and then require that they pay it by putting it on their, I'm just looking, it's a lien or assessment upon the property abutting the sidewalk, curb, or gutter, and may be enforced in the amount against the owner of the, abutting the sidewalk. I tell you that because that just kind of goes hand in hand with what they're saying. It's hard for us to get contractor to be able to do this, yet we do have the authority to have you or an engineer order the sidewalks in and then assess an owner when there is a repair that needs to be done. But it practically can't get done when you have.
And then us budgeting for that because we're not recouping those costs. until-
Right. Well, and until they're recouped through a lien or assessment. Right.
So I might add, before we made the change to fall more in line with the resolution, there was a waiting list of, I think, 200 plus people. we changed to fall in line with the resolution more because a lot of those folks have been on the list for some time. Some had already got their sidewalks done. Some people had sold their home and no longer interested, so we went to, when we fell in line more with the original resolution, that's where we opened the application period on February 1st on a first come, first served basis. As you get your applications in, our staff goes out in order that they were received, inspects those sidewalks. And yes, February 1st, it's typically snow covered but once that weather starts to clear, they're out assessing, giving estimates. And then as we get signed estimates to be on the program, that's when the money comes, when we subtract the money basically out of the program. So we did a handful of them to get up to basically 130,000 this year, I think is the number. And that's where we had to stop because there are contingencies. There are things that come up when those sidewalks are taken away. So we wanted to make sure that there was room to absorb those contingencies if there were any. So just on this enforcement, I think the attorney pretty much kind of, all those code sections allow for a lien or to put a lien on the property for the work that's been done. Or they go on the program. So the path ahead.
I made these ones fun. Just for you.
So, that's what we don't like to see, other than there's a portion of the population that do like to ride through those mud puddles but this is what we would prefer to see. So this is another fun slide that I can't take credit for. This is Mr. Cooey. So if you get motion 6.
Warning to everyone. on
Yeah.
So this is just a potential decision matrix to look at sidewalks everywhere. And if we were to ask the commission at this point or some point in the future, do you want sidewalks everywhere? And the answer was no, then we have a couple options. We can maintain the existing program and allocate funding at a level that the commission would like, or to keep it at the regular level. Revise the existing program, which is, increase the allocation for funding. Maybe try a different program approach where it's 50-50 with the landowner. So that 150,000 turns into 300,000 because the city's only participating in half of the cost of the sidewalks. And there's many other different types of programs out there, but that's just one of them. If the answer were to be yes, and I'll let Chris talk these ones through.
Mayor Pro Tem and Commissioner, so if the answer is yes, for, again, a concentrated effort for sidewalks, right? So on the no side, it's more of a, no, we want to continue going as we go and get them where we can get them. If the commission wants to take the approach of, yes, we want to actively put sidewalks in where they are not. I think from our end, the most logical answer to that is a sidewalk district. That allows the city to both have the funding and the ability to actively pursue putting in sidewalks. So the first part of that is, how do you create it? I think Doctor here can back me up on the process a little bit, but we could put it to a vote to the citizens, or you could allow it to go through, I think, what is the typical creation process of allowing for a protest period. And so whichever avenue the commission want to go with that, if it were to pass either way or another, then we can start talking about how do we fund the district. A couple options for that as well. Director Knopke and I and our engineer Mark talked ourselves in circles for about 2.5 hours the other day, trying to discuss, well, what's the best way to assess people in the district, right? Some people have sidewalks, some people don't. If you already have sidewalks, probably don't want to pay for installation of sidewalks. If you don't have sidewalks, you might not want to pay for maintenance of sidewalks that already exist. So there was a lot of sort of back and forth on that, but ultimately, we kind of landed on, again, these two options of, do we assess them equally, everybody pays the same? Or do we assess them equitably, everyone pays a certain proportion based on some set of scenarios? And then once we work through the funding, we start working out a plan for how do we now complete the installation and or maintenance of this district. And again, a couple of ideas, either strategic grids, so put up a map, divide the city into sections and methodically go through and get them done. The other side would be by need-based. So it would probably still be dividing the city into some sections, but to focus our efforts on the areas that either, are mostly have no sidewalks, or maybe have the biggest area of sidewalks that are in disrepair, something like that. So a lot of different moving parts to a district. And again, this is just sort of an idea flow on some options on the way that we go through that process.
Commissioner Reed?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Question, in your scenario, I'm not super familiar with sidewalk districts. Is the city one district or would it have several districts within city limits?
So Mayor Pro Tem and Commissioner Reed, that's a good question. We've also had that discussion. And so the answer is, could be both. We could have one district that addresses both installation and maintenance. We could have an installation district and a maintenance district. We could have a bunch of different special districts that sort of play to whatever the specific need is within the district. So different options for the commission to consider as if we were to go down the path, we'll call it, right?
And I do want to acknowledge Mayor Collins has joined us online. So Mayor, if you would like to take over, if you have any questions, just let us know. I think Chris can keep moving now.
So funding considerations, again, not to point out or direct in any one direction, we tried to give as many ideas as we could come up with here. So we could try and leverage some TIF money, tax increments. Again, a partnership with an adjacent landowner, which is similar to how the sidewalk program works now, right? It's we pay some, they pay some, and the part that they pay is assessed. We could go again the route of special improvement districts and have those different specifications. The city's general capital fund, the 440, right, is Director Danielson may not agree, but maybe an option. And then again, going into the different, whether it may be an improvement district or maintenance district, how we go about creating and deciding on those. And then again, if we do a district and we have this pot of money, is it at that point still 100% assessment funded? Does the general fund or somewhere else kick in anything at that point? So what amount of burden do we put on the district itself?
Can I ask, are there any other communities that have created sidewalk districts?
Yeah, Mayor Pro Tem, commissioners, there are several.
There are.
Missoula has some. One of the bigger ones in our region is Seattle. I can't remember the fund amount, but it's a significant amount of funding, and they've already gridded their city. And each year, everybody knows when they're in where they're in the process, and each year that money gets allocated, and that area gets built out to whatever extent it needs to be.
So Missoula is not citywide, it's just particular areas.
I would have to
right?
double check, but I think they've created some sidewalk areas to address some of the issues.
Okay.
But it's not an uncommon practice to create a sidewalk district or a special district to address connectivity issues or or maintenance issues.
Okay, and then, so again, if we go down this road of a district, once it's created, again, going back to the idea of how do we start to implement that, strategic grid systeming, every year, we obviously would bring that piece of it through the CIP process for approval to say this is the section that's getting done for the next budget year. And then, as we go along, identify all the different areas and bring them forward.
So our implementation approach and next steps. A possible approach is to start with the schools and work outward. Safe routes to school. Now, our schools aren't distributed equally throughout the city to where that works out perfectly, but it does give us a good starting point. And as we go 1 block, 2 blocks, 3 blocks out, eventually those rings do overlap and they will be connected. And then those resources that were, allocated for this area would just be reallocated to another area that, has some larger gaps between the schools, if that's the approach we use. So, as I said earlier, we're going to continue to talk about this, not just over the next few months, but over the next couple of years, depending upon how we approach sidewalks for the city. But, in short-term needs, I'm not expecting a decision tonight or anything, but just short-term needs is, fiscal year 24 budget decisions on allocations, the amount of allocations, are we going to increase it? How does that look? And then policy guidance. If the commission comes up with some policy guidance that requires code revisions, we can start work on that now, or that may come down later on the road. Long-term need, if we do go down, say, special improvement districts or sidewalk districts, finding that sustainable funding source for the long term, if sidewalks everywhere or sidewalks are the vision for the city. Revised city code is needed for whichever approach, and then finalize that vision and execute is the long term. Any questions?
City manager?
So, and I think this is somewhat repetitive, but the goal tonight was just to lay the groundwork where we've been, where we are, potentially where you might want to go. And we look at this item being one where now you've got some information to digest, talk to people, start formulating an opinion, ask further questions. We'll bring it back to an administrative meeting, touch base, see if anything's developed or evolved. At some point, I think that you'll be ready to have a policy level discussion. We will tee that up and carry forward to see where you guys want to go. I think it's real important because part of what's been an issue over time, and we're talking decades, is that we tend not to look at this citywide. We look at it neighborhood wide, or not even neighborhood wide, maybe even a block. But perhaps it might mature at a citywide approach to sidewalk maintenance and development. Sure.
Commissioner Reed?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I guess some questions and requests. If it would be possible at an administrative meeting to get more information about the creation of a special district,
Yeah.
what that looks like, what it entails procedurally, how does that work, what's a timeline? I think that would be useful for discussions. And also, I know Safe Routes to Schools has come up a couple of times, but if we could get more information about I believe it's a federal program, what their criteria is, what block radius is considered, so that if we are using that as a framework for discussion, it matches an existing funding stream by the same name so that we can make those things work. I would appreciate more information on both of those.
City
Mayor
manager?
Pro Tem, absolutely. And I think that you're all aware that we have engaged the school district.
I was gonna make a comment, Mayor Pro Tem. Thank you. So I agree. I think looking at what Commissioner Reed had pointed out, having a kind of what it's gonna look like, potential funding sources, but also too, looking at, are there other communities within the state of Montana or within the region or similar size? Does the League of Cities and Towns, do they have a record of communities that have done this kind of thing before? I think I live right across the street from a school, and we're the only side of either side of that school that does not have a sidewalk. And looking at how do we start that process? How much is it going to cost? The creation of that district, definitely open to that as well. But yeah, I think the more information helps us kind of come to those policy opinions and decisions later on. So thank you.
So Mayor Pro Tem, what I'm hearing so far, and I'll just run it by you to make sure, but comparatives, what are other cities doing? I think an analysis of funding options, SIDs, but what does the district look like as well? And then I think importantly, what's the inventory and potential cost? And how does that relate to the funding mechanisms over time? I think that's probably where we should start continuing our research so that when we have better information in that regard, then we'll schedule it up and get a report back.
I think Commissioners and City Manager, I like that approach. I think moving forward, I would be interested in maybe an evaluation of not just, what does a district look like, but what are our options for multiple districts or different types of districts. I think I've been supportive and will continue to be supportive of really starting at from the Safe Routes to Schools approach. One of the things that Safe Routes to Schools, their national guidance is that you have not just an inventory, but a real clear understanding of what the particular needs are for every single school, because it looks different in each neighborhood. I think we're well on our way to that already, but it's a discussion that, we've started with the school district, and they've indicated their strong partnership and, continuing that. Another thing that I would like for us to consider is, and I think this comes back to what could these particular districts look like, or expansion of, our sidewalk program. The economic realities of a lot of folks around the community, especially those that don't have sidewalks, I think is realities that we need to make sure that we take into account, because connectivity is a something that we as a commission have adopted as a priority. Not just this one commission, but the growth policy, we've adopted it within that. We'll be opening up the LRTP next year. I'm sure that it will be a huge conversation piece in that. So we have these policy documents where we have committed to improving connectivity around the community. But sidewalks are expensive. I mean, putting in one sidewalk costs someone, depending on the situation, but $10,000. The average person cannot just put, I don't know if any of you, but I don't have 10,000 bucks sitting around. I don't think the average Helena citizen does, which is why our program has been so important, because over 10 years, that's $1,000 on your property taxes instead that you can be paying off. But even so, an extra $1,000 is, that's a significant expense for most people. And so I think that we need to keep those things in mind. I also would love for us to get to a point where we're not relying on the general fund, because that's exactly why we haven't been able to scale this program. I think like we would like to in a lot of sense, because the general fund obligations are just, we have a competing interests across the city. We're in conversations right now of our fire department planning committee where we're looking at what does it look like to build a third station that we've been in need of over the last, nearly 20 years. And a lot of other needs that we haven't addressed over the last decade. So I think that this is a priority, but I also want to make sure that we realize that there are other competing interests within the general fund. So how do we do this in a manner that, one, expands sidewalk connectivity, and two, takes into account the economic realities of our citizens. We also, there's lots of people who utilize our sidewalks that aren't city residents. That's just our reality. But I think it's something that we need to ensure that we don't forget, and having the numbers will be very helpful. Commissioner Reed.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Just one other question, comment. I'm not sure what it is, but in addition to Safe Routes to Schools, I know we as a commission received a letter from someone addressing connectivity for persons who are in wheelchairs. So I don't know if, I know I've heard in the past that there used to be like a bike corridor between downtown and the Capitol. I think it was Fifth Avenue, or there was some street there was a bike lane and there was talk about it. So I'm wondering if in the past we have identified key connector corridors between downtown, the Capitol, and the hospital, or other areas where we might look at connectivity beyond just schools, but for people who move between the major centers in our town and may need access to sidewalks for wheelchair use or other accessibility points. If that's been done, if it could be done, if we know anything, if we have any maps that show that.
Mayor Pro Tem, Commissioners, what we thought we could do in that respect is to use the same map that we use for our plowing. So our emergency snow routes go to places that the hospital, to the Capitol, so you could start at the emergency snow routes, make sure that those are good, and you could go down to the priority 1 routes, the priority 2s, and so on. Or you could do a combination of 2. You could do that versus the safe routes to school implementation and connect those routes. So there's a number of ways that we can do this. I think the bigger question is finding that sustainable funding source that is economically viable for folks and the city, and trying to implement it in the most efficient manner that we can, in the quickest manner, because obviously, doing this over a 30-year period is a very, very long time, and results are limited at that point. So how do we implement it quickly and economically for the benefit of all?
Any other, we're going to get to public comment in just a moment. Any other comments from the commission or staff? Yes, Commissioner Sherwood.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Absolutely. I cannot agree more when it comes to making it economical. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Reed, Dean, for making that comment. It is a lot, especially in this economy that we're sitting in today with inflation and the cost of living, and finding ways, if there's pots of money or partnerships that we can make, whether it's with the school district, cost share for sidewalks that are nearby. But also too, we just had Halloween. We don't have a sidewalk in front of our house, but we had kids running through our lawn. We love having kids coming by our house, but it would be nice to have those sidewalks. And I think in terms of connectivity, being economic, reliable, we have to look at community safety as well. I love the idea of the bike route that Commissioner Reed mentioned. I think we are a bike-friendly community up in our trails, but inside city limits, not so much. And I think that's another thing we need to consider. But thank you for your work on this. We do appreciate it.
Okay, with that, we will open up for public comment. Mr. Raymond.
Yes, I certainly commend city staff on highlighting safe routes to school as a way to get into sidewalk program. And even though the circles may overlap at some point between schools, it's important to keep in mind One example is non-motorized advisory committee took a look at Broadwater Elementary, which is on the lower west side. And we did a walk audit with Mark Young and representatives from the Independent Living Project and from the non-motorized transportation committee and the local school principal, elementary principal, and representatives of the parent-teacher conference. So all of us walked around Broadwater Elementary School. And what you discover when you do that is that there are no sidewalks west of Broadwater Elementary on the lower west side. Not on Piosta, not on Waukesha, not on Hollins, not on Wilder. And I might add, there's none on Euclid either. There are driveways on Euclid, but there are no sidewalks. So when you think about it, the parent teachers who were on our walk audit urged us to get sidewalks for students so they can walk to school or ride their bicycle on the sidewalk. Currently, all the families that live west of Broadwater Elementary walk in the street. There are no sidewalks. And I'm sure Broadwater is not the only school that sits that way. That's why we've advocated through the, how many years now, David? 4 or 5 years for sidewalks on Ninth Street. We have a middle school, C.R. Anderson, which serves all of the west side, upper and lower. And there are no sidewalks on Ninth Street. There's no way for middle school students to walk to school except in the street. And that's not safe. I don't care how you cut it. Those are not safe routes to school. Safe routes are sidewalks out of car and vehicular traffic. So I certainly commend David and the staff for coming forward and looking at how do you get a new sidewalk policy. And a good way would be to look at safe routes to schools. And there in fact is $200,000 set aside under that program for sidewalks. I would urge you to look at that as a way to start in allocating for new sidewalks. And so in, as Commissioner Shirtliff and Dean both and myself live on the lower west side, we know what it's like. The rest of you who don't, I'm telling you, it's a hazard waiting to happen. When the principal walked with us around Broadwater Elementary, she was aghast at the fact that there are no sidewalks west of that school. And the ones going east stop at Benton, of course. And that's a high traffic. Piosta, Hollins, Wilder are all 3 high traffic entrances to the lower west side from Benton Avenue. And so the kids in the 2 or 3 blocks between Broadwater Elementary and Benton Avenue have sidewalks. But everybody west, including past Henderson, have no sidewalks. And what the parents told us was, even with the flashers that we worked with the city staff on Henderson, they don't feel safe letting their elementary school kids walk across Henderson alone, unguarded. And so I think that's a good example, David, of how to allocate for new sidewalks. Is start at the schools and work your way out. And when you reach a concentric school circle from one school to another, okay, then you can readjust as necessary. But that's a good way for you as a city commission, I think, to look at how do we allocate these? Well, do we want to protect our children in Helena or don't we? It's really I mean, watch the kids walking. I mean, and I talked before Commissioner Shirtliff was appointed that he and I in our neighborhood had talked about parents drive up on Hollins Avenue from the west side, from Henderson area, and they drop their kids off. Well, they're heading east, which is opposite the school entrance. And the kids get out of their cars and scoot across the street. It's not a crosswalk, it's in the middle of the block. And that's simply not safe. I see it from where I live on Hollins. Commissioner Shirtliff, I'm sure you see it even more so because it's right across from your house. And that's what we need to try to solve. And we have budget for safe routes to schools, and we ought to use it. Ninth Street, we need to get those sidewalks in for middle school kids to get out of the streets going to school. And it helps motorists and parents because it gets the kids safely out of those streets on Ninth Street, on Hollins Wilder, and Peosta, down to Hudson, Waukesha, all of those streets. And with non-motorized transportation, we're not the folks who are advocating for more mountain trails. We're the folks who advocate to make it safe for our kids to get to school and get home from school or get to work if you're riding a bicycle yourself. Anyway, that's all my comments, Commissioner, Mayor Pro Tem.
Any other public comment?
Mayor Pro Tem, Commissioners, I do have one, scratch that, I have two written public comments, assuming there's no one else in the room. that would like
We
to-
do have one more comment back here and then we'll move to online.
Yeah, I was just gonna echo a lot of what was said. I live near Bryant School and basically south and east of Boulder Avenue. And once you start getting further, away from Montana, the sidewalks go away. They're very incomplete. I looked into the sidewalk program. I appreciate that it exists in the spirit of it. I live on a corner lot. It would cost me $9,000 to embark on that. I asked my adjacent neighbors if they would be willing to pay $4,500 for to install new sidewalks where they don't exist so that we would have connectivity. They all said that was a price that was not something that they could commit to. And so this hodgepodge approach feels short-sighted. It is not something that's feasible. And I watch kids walk to school in the middle of the street all the time, as well as Flowcrit is up the block. Friendship Center is down the block, Big Brothers Big Sisters, Food Pantry. Everyone is in the middle of the street and it's scary. It's scary to see. I walk to work most days from 6th Ward to downtown, and it's always like which route has more sidewalks that I feel like walking on and feel safe today. And I would love to see a walkable, bikeable Helena that has lighting, that's safe, that decreases my need to drive a silly 5 minutes and walk instead. But the price is not something that I can take on as a newer homeowner. And to see my neighbors also say, yeah, that sounds like a great idea, but it's not something I can afford, just shows me that it's not a program that seems like it can take Helena into the whatever next chapter it wants to be in, I guess. And I really am worried about the kids. They're awesome, wonderful neighborhood kids, and I'm super nervous that people drive really fast on some of those streets, and because they're wider streets and there aren't boulevards, the traffic goes pretty fast, and it just takes one time for a horrible thing to happen. That would be awful. So
Thank you.
Can I get a name?
Okay, yes.
Mara Silvers. I can spell it if you'd like.
Thank you.
Online.
I have two written public comments. The first is from TJ Lehman. Jefferson Elementary School on Broadway and Montana Avenue is another example of a district that could use sidewalk connections to make safe routes for children and families to walk or bike to school. I would hope that all schools are looked at closely for safe routes to schools. Thank you. Second is listed only as James. We Have we considered other options for implementation? For example, we could reduce the street width by adding the sidewalk and boulevard into the street. Many of our streets are 40 feet wide. This would have several benefits: easier sidewalk installation, reduced street maintenance cost, improved safety through reduced vehicle speed, and others. We also need to consider other things that make walking a better option. For example, increased density through zoning changes. I do have one hand raised online, Lowell Chandler.
Please go ahead.
Hello, everyone, Commission and Transportation Division folks. I really appreciate this summit. I wish I could have made it in person. My comment echoes what Wilbur, can you hear me okay?
We can.
Okay. My comment echoes what Wilbur. I believe that comment from James, who's also Transportation Advisory Council, as I am as well. I'm also a District 3 representative of the Citizens Council. But yeah, I mean, my main point here is I agree that the existing sidewalk program is not workable. Sidewalks are just too expensive for the average citizen to handle, unfortunately. But I would say that our streets are generally pretty wide in Helena. And like James said, we could strategically minimize the width of certain streets, particularly with a focus on streets that serve as corridors to elementary, middle school, high schools. Like Knight Street, for example, would be a great option to turn into a one-way, and you have one lane on each side of that lane. You still have parking, and then on the other side of one side of the parked cars, there's a separated pathway for bikes, for walkers. And that way we use the existing infrastructure of the road. We don't have to spend, millions on new concrete. It's just a simple barricade that divides the multi-use pathway on a street like Knight or even Hollins, Piosta. And you turn that into a two-way multi-use pathway. So it's just, I think that's a solution that maybe the city could look into, to find a low-cost option of bringing multi-use pathways to the city without, bankrupting the city's general fund or bankrupting or putting the onus on homeowners to install sidewalks. But yeah, that's all I have for now. I'm sure I'll think of other things later on, but I appreciate the opportunity to comment and everyone's work on this subject. Thank you.
Any further public comment? Okay, are there any final comments from any members of the commission or staff before we move on to the city manager's report?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I just want to say thank you also to all the work that went in to the presentation. I know getting to the place where we can have this conversation has been a long road, and I appreciate all the future requests we'll have for more information. So thank you in advance.
I will just say in some closing remarks that Director Kanapi and Director Kui, Assistant Director Kui, that's what your title is. Thank you for all your, this is something that we've been discussing for the last 2 years and truly something that Helena's been discussing literally since the 1890s. I wish that we weren't in the situation where we have 40% of our community that are lacking sidewalks, but we have to start somewhere. And I think it's important that we continue these discussions with looking forward to the more information. I do think that there's a lot to consider when we start talking about, the dollars. I think some of the public comment indicates, and we hear it all the time, sidewalks are very expensive. They're expensive for the city for our own facilities. And so, how do we find a path forward where we can fulfill the goals of our growth policy, our multimodal transportation plans, et cetera, addressing those issues while also not perpetuating these challenges. One thing I do think that maybe we could focus on in the near term that's low hanging fruit is some of those maybe code updates. Will come as no surprise to any staff. I'm not a fan of variances because I think we frequently have instances where people are asking for variances that in my evaluation, don't necessarily meet what should qualify for a variance, but nonetheless, it's in code, and so people ask for it. I think if we could maybe move forward with some potential policy refinements to specify what actually qualifies for a variance and move that into more of an administrative process rather than coming to the commission, except for maybe through an appeal process, that would, one, I think it'll make us more efficient, and two, limit the with every change in commission, we're not necessarily going to be reinventing the wheel when it comes to variances. I guess that's the best way I'd put it. And I think that's some low hanging fruit that we can knock out more quickly. So with that, if there are no other comments from staff, we will go ahead and move on to the city manager's report.
And Mayor Pro Tem, I don't have a report this evening.
Okay, excellent. Is there any public comment on any item not discussed during this meeting? Any general public comment? Madam Clerk?
I have none on mine.
Okay, excellent. Well, again, appreciate this presentation. I'm glad that we're continuing these discussions. I think we'll continue to get a little bit into the weeds, but that's not a bad thing when it comes to sidewalks because it is a lot more complex than just pouring cement. So glad that we're having these conversations. And with that, this meeting is adjourned.